Good morning, passengers. Welcome to Martel Air. My name's Amanda, and I'll be your pilot for today. We're just beginning boarding for flight number 5 from Temora to Albury, so grab your seats while I finish up the last steps of the pre-flight inspections of this Cessna Grand Caravan, the pride of the Martel Air fleet. Before engine start checklist. Pre-flight inspection complete. Parking brake handle set. Switches off. Ignition switch normal. Fuel tank selectors both on. Bleed air heat switch off. Power lever idle. Prop RPM lever max. Fuel condition lever cut off. Fuel shut off knob on. Battery switch on. Cabin lights on. Cockpit lighting set. Wing flaps position up. No smoking light on. Before engine start checklist complete. The weather today is sunny and we'll be cruising at an altitude of 8,000 feet, flying over the towns of Wagga Wagga and Holbrook on our flight down to Albury. Your cabin crew today is me, and your emergency exits are located to the back of the cabin where you entered the plane. I also have a door up here by me, and if you see me leave, please follow me quickly. Our in-flight catering services are provided by our wonderful passengers, so I hope you packed something interesting. Engine start checklist. Battery switch on. Beacon light on. Avionics 1 on. Bus faults check. Emergency power lever normal. Inertial separator handle bypass. EIS readings check. Propeller area clear. Fuel boost switch on. Fuel boost on check. Fuel pressure load not shown check. Fuel flow 0 check. Starter switch start. Ignition on check. Oil PSI check. NG stable. Fuel gear ignition lever low idle. Fuel flow check. NG climbing. NG stable. Starter switch off. EIS readings check. Generator load check. Battery amps check. Fuel boost switch normal. Avionics 2 on. Nav lights on. Engine start checklist complete. Oh, we're up to 4 passengers. That is lovely. Hello, everybody. We're now ready for departure, so please fasten your seatbelts and turn off your devices, apart from those used to watch this stream. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Before taxi checklist. Taxi lights on, seatbelt lights on. Taxi clearance. Temora traffic, Martel 05 is taxiing to runway 36. Taxi clearance check. Nav source set. Prop RPM to minimum. Fuel condition low idle. Inertial separator bypass. Parking brake off. For taxi checklist complete. Checking that we're not gonna hit anything. Lovely. And it looks like we are almost immediately on top of a runway. So we'll be doing an intersection takeoff, but luckily this plane loves to just jump into the sky, because we're already at runway 36. Although I think we might actually use runway 18, just because it's the same runway, but going the way we're going. Temora traffic, Martel 05 taking off from runway 18, intersection departure to the south. Okay. Before takeoff checklist. Parking brake set. Altimeter QNH set. Standby flight instruments check. Fuel boost switch normal. Fuel tank selectors both on. Fuel quantity check. Fuel shutoff knob on. Standby alt power on. Anti-ice system not required when it's 32 degrees Celsius. Inertial separator handle normal. Autopilot. Cruising altitude set. Flight level change set to VY. Heading set to runway. Come on. Heading set. Runway heading. Bank mode engaged. Autopilot set. Transponder on alt. Wing flaps position. Takeoff. Takeoff clearance check. Strobe lights on. Landing lights on. Seatbelt lights on. Parking brake release. Fuel condition High idle, prop RPM to max. Before takeoff, checklist complete. Quick double check of the runway. There's no one on it. Smoothly advance to takeoff power. And rotate. Climbing at about 83 knots until we are clear of terrain. Flaps up. And autopilot set. And there we go, we are in the air. So, if any of the lovely passengers today are in the chat, feel free to say hi and possibly start a conversation of some kind, but otherwise I will continue my normal ramblings. So, as with the end of last stream, we are in the flat with flat bits part of the New South Wales interior, flying out of Temora and flying south through the area generally known as the Riverina. It's a bit different to the French Riviera, but you know, it's got some lovely flat bits. And out in the distance there you can see the flat with crinkly bits. And hello, Radar Sondi. Boulder, Colorado. I think that's one of the more terrifyingly snowy areas that I've heard of. Yes, 32C is much nicer than 32F. I've not encountered anywhere quite so snowy except for the parts of Australia that are just on top of mountains, let's say. One of my favourite little linguistic tidbits is that Australians have a saying for going on a skiing holiday called going to the snow. Because in Australia, snow is something that you have to go to. It doesn't just happen everywhere, as I get the impression it does in most of the popular parts of Europe and North America. We get snow in ski resorts only. They're on top of mountains and they're built around. Hardly snowy here compared to what the poor sods in the non-treasonous colony to the north. Yeah, Canadian weather seems fake, not gonna lie, but then again, all snow seems fake to me. Like, I've seen snow. It was weird. It's the way that it changes the topography of everything around you while not hauling snow away in dump trucks. See, I have no concept for that quantity of snow. We get rain, we get hail, we get rain, we get not rain, but yeah, like my concept of winter doesn't include snow. It's strange the differing perspectives you get from these sort of things. Okay, looks like we're just approaching our cruising altitude. So, paying attention to all of the instruments. Okay, cruising checklist. Seatbelt light off, landing lights off, anti-ice system. We're at 8,000 feet and it's still 10 degrees, so not much required in the way of anti-icing even up here. Inertial separator is normal. Prop RPM set. Power lever set for cruise. Fuel balance check. ITT check. Cruise checklist complete. So just shifting across so that I can actually show you the map without my face in the way. It's an almost straight shot all the way down over here, over Wagga Wagga and over Holbrook, and flying over Holbrook basically sets us up for the approach into Albury. It's always fun when everything just kind of lines up. And as we're in the uncontrolled parts of the airspace, largely from being at 8,000 feet instead of airliner altitudes, we don't even need to deal with flight permissions, we just need to not fly into anything. And now, of course, as we're flying at a consistent altitude and a consistent speed above a very consistent landscape, the question becomes, when you've got a flight that's lasting approximately an hour all told, what do you do to fill the time? So one of the things that I've been looking at doing is incorporating a little bit of in-flight entertainment, because while I'm doing these flying tours over Australia, there's a whole bunch of Australian poetry that I could be introducing to people who might not have heard it. So, while also checking the instruments to make sure everything is going fine and I'm not going to lose track of everything while trying to be cultured, let's see. So the two options that I was tossing up between are Mulga Bill's Bicycle and Bush Christening, both by Banjo Paterson, one of the more famous Australian poets of late 19th century. A lot of the famous Australian culture things can tend to be that part of history just because it's when Australia was being founded. It was when everything was kind of getting worked out. If you hear about Ned Kelly and all the other bushrangers, it's the same period. Now, I think there was going to be a few people from the Hands of the Emperor Discord hopefully trying to make it, and if they aren't here, then they can catch it on the recording on YouTube anyway, because I think I will do Mulga Bill's bicycle, which to anyone who's read The Return of Fitzroy Angersell is going to come across as a bit of a familiar story. Now, I've not tried doing poetry reading as one of these before, so let's see how that even goes. And again, checking to make sure that the plane is flying properly with that 10-knot crosswind and the navigation all set. We're just coming up towards Wagga Wagga, which is the basis of several weird jokes. And ironically, I believe it means many crows. It's one of the Aboriginal languages that uses reduplication for plural, so crow to mean crows. I think it's crows. Anyway, so Mulga Bill's bicycle. 'Twas Mulga Bill from Eagle Hawk that caught the cycling craze. He turned away the good old horse that served him many days. He dressed himself in cycling clothes, resplendent to be seen. He hurried off to town and brought a shining new machine. And as he wheeled it through the door with air of lordly pride, the grinning shop assistant said, "Excuse me, can you ride?" "See here, young man," said Mulga Bill, "from Walgett to the sea, from Conroy's Gap to Castlereagh, there's none can ride like me. I'm good all round at everything, as everybody knows. Although I'm not the one to talk, I hate a man that blows. But riding is my special gift, my chiefest sole delight. Just ask a wild duck, can it swim? A wildcat, can it fight? There's nothing clothed in hair or hide, or built of flesh or steel. There's nothing walks or jumps or runs on axle, hoof or wheel. But what I'll sit, while hide will hold and girths and straps are tight, I'll ride this here two-wheeled concern right straight away at sight." 'Twas Mulga Bill from Eagle Hawk that sought his own abode, that perched above the Dead Man's Creek, beside the mountain road. He turned the cycle down the hill and mounted for the fray, but ere he'd gone a dozen yards, it bolted clean away. It left the track, and through the trees, just like a silver streak, it whistled down the awful slope towards the Dead Man's Creek. It shaved a stump by half an inch, it dodged a big white box. The very wallaroos in fright went scrambling up the rocks. The wombats hiding in their caves dug deeper underground, as Mulga Bill, as white as chalk, sat tight to every bound. It struck a stone and gave a spring that cleared a fallen tree. It raced beside a precipice as close could be. And then, as Mulga Bill let out one last despairing shriek, it made a leap of 20 feet into the Dead Man's Creek. 'Twas Mulga Bill from Eagle Hawk that slowly swam ashore. He said, "I've had some narrow shaves and lively rides before. I've rode a wild bull round a yard to win a £5 bet, but this was the most awful ride that I've encountered yet. I'll give that two-wheeled outlaw best, it's shaken all my nerve. To feel it whistle through the air and plunge and buck and swerve. It's safe at rest in Dead Man's Creek, we'll leave it lying still. A horse's back is good enough, henceforth for Mulga Bill." So there we go. The tale of Mulga Bill's bicycle. It's back when bicycles were new and people who rode horses were smug, as you know. People will always be smug. And now we check the instruments again to make sure we're not going to plummet. Yep. Lovely. And we get some country town, small city views as we come over the town of Wagga Wagga. And just looking on the map, you can see that there's a small airport. I think it might be a RAF base, but also just town, city, with the various things that you see in such setups. And because it is dusty and flat and daytime, daytime means that you don't get the lights from the town, making it a little more obvious where it is, and because it's flat in the middle of the flat bits, you can see that there is not much to show the difference. There's, your standard lovely wiggly river, including oxbow cutoffs, which, if you ever heard older Australian stuff talking about billabongs, such as the song Waltzing Matilda, a billabong is in fact an oxbow cutoff lake, which is where the wiggly river wiggles a bit too much and takes a shortcut so that one of the wiggles just gets separated and becomes its own little lake. This is an almost entirely useless fact, but now you know it. This is the thing about listening to me, you will get many useless facts that you didn't need, but now you know. In fact, my brain is composed almost exclusively of such things. And it looks like we've got about another 25 minutes of travel time. One of the things that I'm working on for these streams is working out how long a flight should I be doing. At some point, when there's a decent number of people actually consistently watching these, I might try something longer. The notion of the extra long stream where I take up to a day to fly somewhere with several stops for more petrol has been raised. I'm not currently doing one of those just because that is a lot. At some point I'll also be doing a circumnavigation of the entire coastal route around Australia. That will take approximately 50 hours total flight time over about 30 flights. So that will be quite the series. We're not up to there yet. For the moment, we'll just be doing our flights around of approximately an hour from one to the next through the bits of Australia that I know more or less, depending on where we're going. The stream after this, we will quite possibly going to... there is Wagga Wagga. I'm pretty sure RAF base, or it might just be an airport, but lovely tower there. Some runways, more houses, because you've got to have more houses. There's a golf course there, probably is a RAF base. I should probably look that up at some point, but maybe when we're actually flying there instead of flying past. One thing that gets fascinating with this plane is the relatively low cruising speed of 130, 135 knots indicated airspeed, which when you compare to an airliner doing 240 instead, you can see why it takes longer to get anywhere in this thing than it does in the big commercial jets. One thing I will say for being a more relaxed streamer rather than the excitable screaming type as you get from many gaming channels is that it's a lot less of a exhausting experience to do, and hopefully less of an exhausting experience to watch. I'm sure it will mean that I don't get quite so many 7-year-old excitable children watching, but I don't think focusing on that sort of market while being me is really that feasible. I'm generally aiming for, if not child aimed, at least child safe, because there is at least one 7-year-old who I have been talking about this stream with specifically. And so, hopefully not teaching him any new language that he doesn't need to be using yet, but hopefully some random ridiculous facts. We'll see. And as my commentary continues, we now have the flat bits with some bits that go up with trees on. One thing that gets fascinating about Australia, especially for people from the more up and down parts of the world, is how flat most of Australia is. The next stream I'm expecting to take us into the Snowy Mountains. The current plan is flying over Mount Kosciuszko, the tallest mountain in mainland Australia, and then flying into Mount Beauty Airport, which is hilariously small. It delights me so. I'll say more about Mount Beauty Airport as we're flying in there. I'm mostly familiar with Mount Beauty as the town nearest the ski resort that my aunt and uncle owned a ski lodge in when I was a kid. So the times when we went to the snow, it was to their place. So going to Falls Creek usually involves a stop at Mount Beauty, just because, for one thing, there's bigger shops there, and it's the town on the way in, while you brace yourself for the more mountainous drive, especially when one of the kids in the car gets motion sickness. That getting up the mountain to Falls Creek was always fascinating. But the thing with Mount Kosciuszko is that by the standards of, for an example from today's passengers, Colorado, it does not count as a mountain by Colorado standards, I'm pretty sure. 2,228 meters, or whatever that is in feet. I probably looked that up before the stream where we fly over it. It's short enough to, for example, not have a permanent snow cap. None of our mountains do. In summer, they make for beautiful hikes. The time I've been to Mount Kosciuszko was a school camp during the summer, or spring, I think. So there were little patches of snow around, but beautiful hikes. There's a chairlift that gets you pretty much to the summit. There's a boardwalk to the summit so that you don't crush the native vegetation. I believe there's also a bar and grill at the top. Yeah, the top of our tallest mountain is wheelchair accessible, which I think tells you something about how flat Australia is. And that's basically because it's some of the oldest landscape left in certain places, so the good mountains have had a lot of erosion time and they're just kind of worn down. Okay, and as we're getting into the more controlled parts of the airspace, Melbourne Centre, Martel 05, type Cessna Caravan, 16 miles north of Holbrook, 8,000 feet. Squawk 2664, Martel 05. And it looks like we've just had some traffic nearby that was spotting us, but they're out that side of the plane and below us, so there's not much of a chance of spotting them. Now, as we're coming up on the town of Holbrook, I will keep an eye out for it. So one of my favourite things about Holbrook, and this is one that unfortunately is not modelled in Microsoft Flight Sim, is that you get weird monuments in various parts of Australia. One of our previous flights, of course, was going to the Big Merino in Goulburn, which, as I said repeatedly during that stream, is a 50-foot tall concrete sheep. Now, Holbrook, which is probably 150 miles from the coast in any direction, has a submarine. Just you know, an actual full-size submarine. This is utterly ridiculous. So the story there is that Holbrook is named after a World War I submarine captain in, I think, probably the British Navy. They changed their name during World War I because before that, Holbrook was Germantown. You don't want to be called Germantown during World War I. It's freedom fries all over again. Or technically the other way round, because this happened before freedom fries. But in the 90s, when HMAS Otway was being decommissioned, it was decided to gift the sail, the sticky up bit in the middle of this submarine, to the town of Holbrook to use as a monument, war memorial sort of thing. And the town decided, you know what, it would be cool to have more than that. So they did some fundraising, and they tried to put together a bid to just buy the submarine itself on the way to the scrappers. Unfortunately, they weren't successful in doing that, and the submarine itself went to a scrapyard, as retired naval vessels pretty much always do. But they'd still done all of this fundraising, so they went to the scrapyard and bought. So it turns out what they could afford to buy was just the outer hull, none of the pressure vessel and all of the contents, and just to the waterline. So the submarine, as it would appear when sitting on the surface while surfaced, because you know where the waterline is on a submarine is sometimes partway down the hull, sometimes 100 feet above it. But so they've got approximately the top 2 meters out of about 5.5 meters of the top of this submarine, and then the sail above it. And because they've got it to the waterline, it's now just like, you know, they've mounted it in concrete in a park. And so it looks like the submarine has just surfaced out of the grass. It is the most ridiculous thing that I've ever... Well, no, it's one of the most ridiculous things. I've visited Holbrook. It's one of the towns that's lovely to stop at when you're doing a long drive somewhere. And just... yeah, random 150 miles inland country town, and there's a submarine there. Transferring to 125.2 Martel 05. Goodbye. Melbourne Centre, Martel 05, cruising at 8,000 feet. Melbourne Centre, Martel 05, request clearance through the Charlie airspace. Cleared through Charlie airspace, Martel 05. And as I said, we are getting into the part of things where we need the air traffic control clearances. Now, as we are now over Holbrook, I'm actually going to take us off the autopilot for a little bit so that we can have a bit of a look at this submarine. Now, as I said, it is unfortunately not modelled in Flight Sim, but that doesn't need to stop us too much, because if we don't get too close, the fact that it's not modelled and we can just kind of see the satellite picture view from the terrain mapping instead will get us some of the fun. I don't usually do too much of the manual flying in this, just because nice, safe, sensible flying is use as much of the automation as you can. But look, there's ridiculous submarines surfacing in the middle of a park to see, so I think that's worth a bit of a diversion. And of course you can't see my map that I'm using to navigate because it's on the cockpit window that is basically directly below where I've put my face, because that's the usual visual language for where a streamer puts their face. But I'm just using it to... when I was setting up the navigation for this flight, I put that marker for where to take the Holbrook turn directly on top of the submarine, just so that I could find it a little more easily. And you know, being a full-size Oberon class submarine, at least as much of it as you would see, we get a lovely little experience of seeing what it would be like for people trying to detect submarines at sea from scouting aircraft, because it's essentially what we're doing. So, you know, we're coming down through 4,700 feet. Now, this will not be as low or as precise as the flight where I showed you the 50-foot tall concrete sheep, because I'm trying to show you what is essentially, in this form of mapping, a little black line that does not show up anywhere near as well and I think, yes, in fact you can see it just there, kind of in the middle of the gap there. There is just a submarine surfaced in the middle of a park. It's quite a pleasant little park, but It's actually much easier to see because of the way that the shadow is going in the satellite picture. And I'm trying to keep an eye on the submarine and the altitude and the airspeed. But there you go. That is a submarine in the middle of a country town for weird reasons. Now, as we are close to Albury, I'm in fact not going to take us all the way back to 8,000 feet, because there's not really much of a point getting back up to 8,000 just to immediately descend. So let's go for 4,500, I think. And then the trick is doing all of the setup for this while maintaining control of the aircraft. And the fact that because I am using a joystick and not a yoke, I have to use my right hand on the joystick, and I've got a right-handed mouse. So anything where I'm set up to try and use both at once gets a little bit fascinating. And we're still sitting at 5 passengers. We've been bouncing between 4 and 5 for most of this flight, which has been delightful. That is definitely a new record. I'm hoping that you're enjoying this, even if Twitch chat we've been discovering is a little bit recalcitrant about letting new passengers into actually chatting. Which I've got all of the security settings on Twitch chat set as open as possible. It's set up so that I can make it so that people can't just come in and be dreadful at me in chat. Like, there's a lot of safety tools that they build in for larger channels, but I've not got that set up because, you know, I've just reached 12 followers and 5 viewers in once, so, you know, this is what they would call an utterly tiny channel. And in the distance there we can just see the lake whose name I cannot remember. I really should have checked that before starting this flight. So, for those who are unfamiliar, Albury is one of Australia's twinned towns that's built along the Murray River, or the River Murray. People say both, and I'm not actually sure which is technically correct. So, the River Murray makes up a large portion of the border between the states of New South Wales, which we're currently over, and Victoria to the south. So Albury is often referred to as Albury-Wodonga because there is Albury on the New South Wales side, and then there are some bridges, and then there's Wodonga. You also get the next largest one that I'm particularly familiar with is Echuca Moama. And again, you have Echuca on one side of the river and Moama on the other. And the thing about the Murray is that by a lot of people's standards, I don't know if it would count as a river. Australia is kind of like this. We have flat and we have dry. I've seen pictures of the Mississippi, and I think by Australian standards the Mississippi River would count as a lake. Now, looking at the stuff for Albury, this is going to be the first airport since Canberra where we've actually got a tower. And instead of a traffic channel, as we've been playing with before, there's actually a control tower for the approaches. What luxury! So, once we get a little bit closer. We're about 17 nautical miles out, about 7 minutes. And just checking the ATIS information, it looks like we're using runway 25. So, given that we're flying in at about 213, we're most of the way towards being on the approach path. Albury Tower, Martel 05 is 16 miles northeast, 4,500 feet, with information mic to land. Bank straight in, runway 25, Martel 05. And there we go. We've got our initial clearance to start the approach. So, set up the approach. Runway 25. Okay, so there's where we need to be coming in from. Lovely. I love this automated navigation thing that makes it so much easier. Okay, approach checklist. Seatbelt lights on. Landing lights. So, landing lights on. Fuel tank selectors both on. Fuel condition high idle. Prop RPM to max. Flaps to approach position. Inertial separator. Bypass. And brakes off. Attention passengers, we're now approaching Albury and I've switched on the seatbelt lights, which means I'd like you to fasten your seatbelts. Enjoy this riddle and more as we come in towards landing, and thank you again for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. No, I want to come in before that point. I want a bit longer on that approach. And again, lovely clear weather, not too much wind. At 4,500 feet, it is still managing to be 19 degrees, so you know, we're up in the air and it's almost t-shirt weather, which is delightful. In general, I prefer things to be about, like, you know, the standard thing is set the aircon to 21. 25 is fine, 30 is annoying. Yeah, so this lake is on the Murray River. It is, you can see where it's disappearing off into being a river, but even this is quite wide by Australian river standards. We're a bit weird like that. Most of our big bridges are in fact technically across bays, or across the lovely crinkly bits where it's more of a gorge than a river. The river is there just coincidentally. It's the big hole that the river's cut that's actually the problem for the road. And now we're getting more towards the bits where I need to focus a little bit better on flying part of this flying. Shocking, I know. And we need to be lower. don't want the direct thing. Flight plan. Oh, it's not. Okay, so apparently it wants me at 2,800 feet. By this... that's not going to happen. But we start the descent. The joys of trying to fly these approaches with one pilot instead of two. Doing these streams has really taught me about why there are two pilots in a cockpit, not one. But as I look on the instruments, we can see that we're starting to pick up the actual glide slope. Which we're just coming up on the proper height and getting into the descent. We just need to get back onto the track, and the autopilot is handling that delightfully. Yep, we are definitely in nav mode now, which is great. And in fact, let's hit that into approach mode, because we have captured... We're on the glide slope. We are getting towards the localizer, and I have the runway in sight. And just quickly, the wiggly strip of water just out there is in fact what a normal river looks like in Australia. So, okay, not yet got the final landing clearance. There we go. Cleared to land, runway 25, Martel 05. And there we go with the landing clearance as we make our approach. We do not want the altitude set. Altitude holding that high. We're in fact too high for this approach. Why is approach... Did I engage approach mode too early? Oh well. It's time to fly it manually. Autopilot off. Seatbelt lights on. Flaps to landing position. Airspeed set for final approach. And power lever ready. And we've got a little bit of a crosswind, and trusting the automation pushed us a little off to the left, but this is all solvable. Trick is small adjustments, and also getting your trim so that the plane is not trying to throw the nose in the air like it just doesn't care. We in fact want a plane that does care. We are still above the glide slope as shown on both the glide slope indicator and the 4 white PAPI lights, but this thing is a lot more forgiving than an Airbus, because it is just an air van. An air people mover. 500 feet above the ground. Speed's climbing a little. There we go. much. The problem with landing a plane is that you need to hit the ground, but only just. Not hitting the ground is easy. Hitting the ground too much is easy. But hitting the ground just enough, that's where landing gets funky. Little bit long. Floating. Don't crash the nose wheel in. And there we go. Whoa. And of course, as soon as the wheels engage, it wants to go forward for the wheels, not forward for the airspeed. And some light braking. Okay, flaps up. And here's our runway exit. Contacting ground on 121.8, Martel 05. Goodbye. After landing checklist, wing flaps up, anti-ice off, standby alt power off, inertial separator bypass, fuel condition lever. Okay. No, that was from the taxi checklist. Okay, no. Strobe lights off, landing lights off. The joys of having all of these checklists on one page and having to work through them quickly. After landing checklist complete. Before taxi checklist. Taxi lights on, seatbelt light on. Taxi clearance. Over ground, Martel 05, request taxi to parking. Taxiing to general aviation parking via taxiway, Martel 05. That is one of the more useless taxi clearances I've gotten, but it seems, according to the map, that general aviation parking is that bit in front of us. So, taxi clearance check, inertial separator bypass, prop RPM to minimum, fuel condition to low idle, parking brake off. But I was just using the foot brakes there. And look both ways before crossing the road. And we taxi. Let's park next to this little biplane. That sounds like fun. And look, there is in fact Albury Tower. It's so very small, but then again, so is the airport. And of course I missed the landing taxi little speech just because it is such a tiny airport and so quick. Attention passengers, we've landed safely in Albury and the local time is 2:09 PM. Please remain seated until the plane comes to a complete stop at whatever ridiculous parking spot they give us. As we've discovered, this one just off the runway. And please remain seated because queuing for the exit in an 8-seater makes you look even more ridiculous than normal. Shutdown checklist. Parking brake set. Power lever idle. Leader heat switch off. ITT range stable. Prop RPM to feather. Let that calm down. Fuel condition to cut off. Inertial separator to normal. Okay. Attention passengers, this now concludes our flight from Temora to Albury, and we here at Martel Air hope you've enjoyed your time in our tiny skybus. Please wait until I've opened the door and you can calmly deplane in an orderly fashion. Our baggage handling services today will be provided by our wonderful passengers, so thank you for not leaving any of your luggage behind. Any personal belongings left behind as you leave the plane will be assumed to be a present for the pilot and enjoyed thoroughly. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Lights off. NG check. Avionics 2 off. 1 off. Battery off. Fuel tank selectors both off. Shutdown checklist complete. And here we are, parked at Albury Airport, nice and neatly, putting that little biplane and the cars to shame with their size, despite the fact that this is just a, single-engine high-wing Cessna, which feels like it should be tiny as well, but when it's got seating for 8 passengers and a lot of cargo, turns out it's not as small as you might think. So, that concludes flight number 5 and stream number 5. I hope you've enjoyed listening to my rambling, and I will hopefully see you next time.